The OA is more than just a Netflix original series. It was something of a modern Bible, an encoded message from enlightened beings meant to help its audience unravel great secrets. It only ended up getting 2 of its planned 5 seasons, and while we could never say with any certainty what this mind-bending show would have done in season 3, 4, or 5, the show is meant to be something of a puzzle. We can't see exactly what is pictured without every single piece, but with the pieces we have, we may at least get some vague idea of how the OA could have ended. But before we dive in, I just want to thank my mentor, the famous 80s psychic Bill Burns, who I had the immense privilege of studying under for 5 years before his passing. Without his spiritual guidance, I would not have been able to tap into the ideas of Zal Batman Galige and Britt Marling. The OA is the story of a character who calls herself by that title, but who also has many different names across the many dimensions explored in the multiverse on the show. In Season 1, or rather Dimension 1, she is known as Prairie Johnson. Born in Russia, she would go blind after a near-death experience that killed her classmates, and end up making it to America, where she would be adopted by an older couple in a town called Crestwood. Here, Prairie would live a life plagued by nightmares she believed to be prophetic, and treated with medicine that dulled her brain. After running away at the age of 18, she returned 7 years later with her eyesight restored and strange scars on her back. She ends up gathering 4 high school boys and their teacher into an unfinished house and tells them the story of her kidnapping. She ran away to find her father because of cryptic dreams she had, but instead ended up meeting Hap, a mad scientist who lured her in with a kind facade and locked her away in an underground prison with several other captives, who are referred to collectively as the Haptives because they are captives of Hap. Hap, or Hunter Allen Percy, forces them to have near-death experiences and records the data in their brains to try and understand where they go on the other side for the short period that they are dead. On the other side, Prairie is given her sight back by an angel named Katoon, who tells her that she is not like the others, as she is the original, and gives her a glowing dove to eat to bring insight back to her friends. There, she starts to say that she is realizing her true name, which sounds kind of like the Away, but she settles on the OA, which the series wants us to believe stands for the original angel, but that is up for debate. Together, they get special knowledge from the other side of their near-death experiences and learn about 5 movements that they can perform together to escape from Hap's bunker. After getting all 5 movements, Prairie is let go, and Hap makes the remaining Haptives perform the movements with him to escape to another dimension. Prairie tells this story to the 4 boys and their teacher, known collectively as the Crestwood Five, even as their group numbers change, in order to teach them the movement so they can try and rescue her friends from Hap wherever they may be. In the Season 1 finale, they succeed, and Season 2 begins with the OA now in a new dimension, one where she never had the near-death experience that blinded her as a child, so she lived a full life in Russia as Nina Azarova, never getting her American name of Prairie from her adoptive parents. The Haptives all find themselves trapped under Hap's rule again in one way or another, with most being patients at his psychiatric clinic in this dimension, or having their memories repressed by their host body, as was the case with Homer, who believed himself to be a doctor working for Hap in this dimension. At the end of the season, OA, Homer, and Hap, and perhaps some other characters, would hop to Dimension 3, showing us what Season 3 would have been about. And while we only get small pieces of it, we were able to fill in the blanks thanks to the patterns that recur in Season 1 and 2, and with the new information we can assume from Dimension 3, figure out what may have happened in Dimension 4 and 5, leading into the end of the show, with Britt Marling and Zal Batman Galige explaining in interviews that each season would tell the same story in different ways, while contributing to this bigger overarching story. When the OA jumps to Dimension 3, she is on a film set creating the OA Netflix series itself. This dimension is designed to be similar to our dimension, with the OA being known as Britt Marling in this dimension, which is of course the name of her real-life actress, and one of the co-creators of the show. Hap and other characters as well use the names of their actors in this dimension. Hap wanted to jump to this dimension because he believed that it was a world where OA would be repressed, thinking of her entire life so far as just part of her imaginative writing on the Netflix series that the two produced together. While names were different between Dimensions 1 and 2, these were explained by divergences in the timeline. Prairie had been born Nina Azarova in Russia, so it would make sense for her to retain that name in Dimension 2, while having her adopted name in Dimension 1. This is all explained by the forking timelines theory that had been discussed in the show, explaining that the multiverse is all just different timelines branching off of each other as different outcomes happen in different realities. Because of this, many of the fans believe that the characters in Dimension 3 are all using screen names to hide their true identities as actors, though it wouldn't make sense for those actors to then allow their real-life names to be used as their names within the OA show in Dimension 3. Because of this, I do not think that Dimension 3 is just an alternate timeline where the characters all ended up moving to London and becoming actors. Instead, I think that Dimension 3 is something of a prime or alpha dimension, with Dimension 1 and 2 all just being fantasies created by Brit Marling as she wrote her Netflix series. Dimension 3's Brit Marling would be similar to her real-life self, albeit not a perfect recreation of her, but she wouldn't have been born in Russia or even necessarily have had the same father as in those dimensions. This is why it was such an amazing revelation for someone like Kareem to open the window and see them filming parts of his life for a TV series. It wasn't that there was another dimension where he and all the others had become actors that happened to film something that happened in his dimension, but that he is just a character who shares little in common with the actor who plays him, and yet is metaphysically connected to him, as people only ever jump into the bodies of themselves in an alternate reality. The whole season we were promised that we would get to the moon and be able to turn around and look back at the Earth and see it for what it really was. Dimension 1 would all just seemingly be the imagination of one woman in Dimension 3. So now, armed with this theory, what exactly would have happened in Season 3, Dimension 3, and beyond? Well, I mentioned earlier that the show tells the same story 5 ways across the 5 dimensions and 5 seasons, and the 2 key themes to the story are the theme of imprisonment and the theme of storytelling itself. The first key theme of the series is that of imprisonment. Each season features the characters being imprisoned by Hap in different ways. In Dimension 1, he lures each of his captives in with a different facade before locking them away in his underground prison like a madman. In Dimension 2, this takes on an even more sophisticated form, with Hap being able to hold them hostage publicly in a way that looks legal to those on the outside, with his role as a doctor giving him authority. Homer, of course, is not a patient of Hap's, but rather an employee, known in this dimension as Dr. Roberts. His host body has repressed Homer's memories, and it is Dimension 1 Homer piloting the body. This theme would carry over into Dimension 3 with new forms of imprisonment, with OA now being held prisoner to her host body's memories as Homer was in Dimension 2. Because of this, any memory she has as Prairie or Nina are written off as her fantasies while writing, feeling surreal to her because of the injury she sustained to her head while on set. In this dimension, Hap, known here as Jason Isaacs, is married to Brit Marling and is a co-creator on the show. Their marriage here parallels the marriage of the medium and the architect from Season 2, who designed the house on Nob Hill using the dreams of the medium put into designs by the architect. In Dimension 3, this dynamic would play out with Brit Marling being the medium, seeing these visions of other worlds, and Jason Isaacs using his skill to turn it into a TV series, producing it together for Netflix. In Dimension 3, the idea of the medium and the architect might be seen as being inspired by Brit's own marriage to Jason Isaacs. In this dimension, Jason Isaacs appears to be a great guy, and while all people have dark sides as the series likes to explore, Jason Isaacs has no reason to be as villainous as the characters he plays on TV, even if he is evil in a lot of them, as even outside of the OA, he is known for playing roles such as Lucius Malfoy, for instance. Because of that, OA, lost inside of Brit's memories of him, will be trusting when he claims that she is being irrational or crazy, even as Homer and Steve try to tell her she really is the OA in their Dimension 3 counterparts. With Brit Marling's injury on set, the show itself could be in jeopardy as well, with the season-long struggle being OA and Hap trying to write where the show would go next. Even with her memories repressed, Prairie would have beautiful ideas of how Season 3 should go, or would undoubtedly end up going, but Hap would try to steer the narrative towards one that makes him the hero. He would cite how audiences love TV shows about horrible people doing bad things like Dexter or Breaking Bad, and would probably push for a cheesy redemption arc to make him likable in a way that is palatable to the masses. This, combined with pressure from Netflix to make the series appeal to a wider audience, would cause OA, still thinking she is only Brit, to let go of her hopes for the series to be what she dreamt it could be, and just choose to believe that Hap is helping her in fixing the series while she recovers from her traumatic head injury. Along with this theme of imprisonment, each dimension also has a theme of storytelling, and the show itself is really just storytelling about storytelling. By the end of the series, the theme of imprisonment will tie in perfectly to that as well, with it all coming together into a moment of enlightenment. The first season focused on Prairie telling the story of her captivity to the Crestwood Five, using the first real form of storytelling, spoken word about supposedly true events. She tells the story like a father telling the story of a monster in the woods, meant to impart a lesson to women and children so they don't get eaten by a bear. The characters all find meaning in the story, and their lives become more meaningful because of it, and they begin to act with more intention towards being better people. By the end of the season, they are convinced that OA's story was a lie and that the movements are imaginary, but their lives are still improved, even if the story is fake. When the shooter makes it to the cafeteria, the five of them instinctually know what to do, the five movements. Not because they now believe OA's story really happened, but that what she said was true regardless, that they were going to see how they could use her story to help others, even if it meant drawing the fire of a gunman to them, or by some miracle, distracting him long enough with a unified spectacle while someone else managed to stop him, believing in their movements so well that even as his guns fire, they don't tremble. Season 2 follows the evolution of storytelling by transitioning to a focus on puzzles and metaphors, in the form of the house on Nob Hill in San Francisco. This house was built by a married couple, the medium and the architect. The house was built over toxic fumes that give people hallucinations, with the Native Americans of the region regarding them as spiritual visions. The house was built based off of the dreams of the medium, with the craft of the architect to create a series of puzzles. When traversed the proper way, the mind would be primed, prepared for, and perhaps even proved worthy of witnessing what is on the other side of the rose stained glass window, and see a greater truth. Houses are the most common metaphor in storytelling, generally representing the characters who live in it, the main characters of the show, or the show itself. In the OA, it is a metaphor about metaphors, a puzzle about puzzles, all talking about the show and how it is just one of the many puzzles artists like to make. The creator isn't trying to fight you in a game, but teach you how to solve the puzzle for yourself, to teach you a new way of thinking so that at the end you will achieve enlightenment, instead of falling back to the ground. Every little puzzle they have you solve along the way in the show is meant to help prepare your brain for bigger and bigger puzzles and revelations that will come along in the following 3 seasons. Kareem is the only one to have made it to the window and seen the other side without being pulled in. This was prophesized by the women of the Dream Study, and I believe the key reason he survived was because he was the first person to make it to the window that was already from another dimension, as we can see that at the beginning of Season 2, that he seemingly died while skateboarding, and then woke up in Dimension 2 without his memories, similar to Homer. This dream would happen again when Kareem sleeps in the house on Nob Hill. Those who solve the puzzles but are being taught how to solve them, such as Scott, end up passing out before they even make it to the window, indicating that those who do make it to the window, like Dimension 2 Michelle, likely only got that far due to someone helping them, even if just the tiniest bit, making Michelle not perfectly primed for the revelation. This seems to be true when we compare Michelle's case to that of the architect, who managed to solve the puzzle and make it to the window, but was pulled in as well. While he did solve the puzzle, he also designed it. He had the mind of a genius for sure, but that did not mean he was properly prepared to receive the enlightenment through the puzzle he designed himself. Designing and solving puzzles simply just gives you a different perspective on them. The medium and the architect are an important motif in the series, as they really represent OA and Hap and their many variances throughout the multiverse. In a way, the entire universe is just one balance between the science and the spirit that each represent, and how they can be used together in harmony to bring about greatness, but how the masculine science is always trying to capture the feminine spirit to harness her in the name of progress, and create the utopian future now so that they may receive the glory for it. That is why, even in her fight, she is always sent a brother, someone with strength who has a sacred promise to protect the feminine spirit in the same way that brothers and other male family members have the sacred responsibility to make sure that other men are not using their strength to harm the feminine spirit on their own sacred missions. And with this, we transition to Season 3 and Dimension 3, where storytelling as a theme takes its modern form: television, particularly modern television, in a world where the OA is just a Netflix original series being made by Britt Marling and Jason Isaacs. In this dimension, they are married, and while they may have their own relationship struggles, my theory is that Jason Isaacs has been a stand-up man in this dimension, helping to turn Britt Marling's dreams into a show. In each dimension, the OA has a sort of psychic power. In Dimension 1, it is that she has prophetic dreams. In Dimension 2, it is instead that she can speak with the natural world, and these gifts are picked up by OA as she integrates across the dimensions. In Dimension 3, it would appear that her gift is to see into other dimensions, but as I discussed before, my belief is that Dimension 3 is some sort of prime or alpha dimension that the OA's universe is just a fantasy in. With Dimensions 1 and 2 just being the fantasies of Britt Marling, that would mean the fates of those worlds and all the people in it rest on Britt Marling creating a show that ends the right way. The season would have undoubtedly dealt with Hap trying to take over the show and change the story so that he is the hero. With OA trapped in Britt Marling's consciousness, she would be trusting Hap, who she believes to just be her trustworthy husband, Jason Isaacs. The fate of these worlds would rest on whether or not OA could remember who she was and stop Hap from turning himself into the hero of the story. This could be the great evil that Katoon warned of in Season 1, as saving the series from Hap itself would save an entire multiverse from what their reality was. It could even have greater implications for other multiverses, as if Britt Marling's creations are other realities, many other fantasies may be realities too, including all of the other roles played by characters of actors on the show. Even just the fate of the show itself would have a ripple effect on other shows. If Hap, the masculine science for profit, was able to triumph over OA, the feminine spirit for art, a fate that the real-life show ultimately succumbed to in that it was cancelled for not bringing in enough money for its ambitious budget. By the end of the season, OA would surface, integrate with Britt Marling, and come to terms with the fact that the worlds she came from are just fantasies reliant on a woman who essentially created her. In the end, however, she would begin to understand Elodie's talk about needing your shadow, integrating it, and finding your place in the balance of these things, and agreed to return to a lower dimension for Season 4. Britt Marling's body would survive, with the host consciousness left behind to continue working on the show, and as we work through Season 4 and 5, we may even still see flashes of this dimension as other characters slowly work their way there, meeting Britt Marling before she helps them onward in their journey. Saving the direction of the story in Dimension 3 was only part of the process, however, and to truly finish telling the story, they would have to keep going to Dimension 4 and 5, accepting to take their place in the grand scheme of things, going downward, hoping for the best way out, but knowing that they will ultimately succumb to whatever fate has in store for them. While we were able to see some glimpses of Season 3 within Season 2, we did not have the same privilege for Season 4 or 5 as far as we know. So because of that, we can't say for sure where Dimension 4 or 5 would actually take place. The show could take us back to Russia, to Atlantis, to the moon, or anywhere else the imaginations of these writers can conceive. However, I think there is a distinct possibility that, at least on a thematic level, the characters will not really be going into a fourth or fifth dimension, but rather back down into Dimension 2 and then Dimension 1. Now, it should be noted that Prairie and others have died in Dimension 1 and 2, making it impossible for them to jump back into their bodies. And the best that would achieve for them would be returning as ghosts the way Rachel did in Dimension 1 after being killed in Dimension 2. That being said, there are going to be alternate timelines out there that resemble Dimensions 1 and 2 in many ways, but where the OA and the people caught in her constellation have never jumped to before. Therefore, Dimension 4 would return to San Francisco, or some other location in a world similar to Dimension 2, and Dimension 5 would return to Crestwood and the underground prison, or again, a dimension that is thematically similar to those. There is even some evidence in the show that we've already seen some of these dimensions, with eerie changes between the different scenes, leading fans to believe that they take place in alternate but similar realities. One particularly notable example of this is how the very first scene of the series, the OA is seen jumping off a bridge with no scars on her back, whereas in the bulk of Dimension 1, she is seen with scars carved into her back from Hap's bunker. While this could be a production error, many fans believe this to be one of many examples of an alternate but similar reality being shown in the series. Outside of the show itself, there is also some really compelling evidence. First and foremost, Britt Marling had discussed in several interviews how she wanted to approach the storytelling in a way that may appeal to women in the way that traditional storytelling structures seem to appeal to men, with the male structure being about a steady build-up to a big climax, with a short release at the end analogous to a male sexual experience, with Britt Marling wanting to attempt something that mimicked the female sexual experience instead. Telling the same story 5 ways across 5 seasons seems to mimic the multiple orgasms of the female sexual experience, and with that, I don't imagine that they would want the ultimate high point of the series to be seasons 4 or 5, as a climax in the 4th or 5th act of a 5-act story is the same pattern as the male sexual experience or traditional storytelling. Instead, by returning to dimensions that are at least thematically similar to Dimensions 2 and then 1, we'll have a story that instead mimics a perfect cycle, with the high point being right in the middle, something with the hints of the female menstruation cycle as inspiration. This idea becomes something of a truth to me when I discovered that the violin theme played within the OA is a palindrome, which is to say, the violin theme plays the exact same song forwards and backwards. To hear the entire song backwards, use the link in the description down below, as I uploaded a video with the discovery so everyone else could hear it. This told me that the story of the OA is meant to be told very similarly back to front, that it was meant to feel like a continuous cycle in many ways that balances each other out, just like the sunrise balances a sunset, yet with each having their own uniqueness. The show itself references Russian nesting dolls a lot, something the creators have said the show is meant to feel like. And as a complete experience, nesting dolls aren't just something that you open more and more of endlessly, but rather the point of them is to eventually put them back inside of each other and to return to the surface level again with new information about the inside. I said before that I could never truly guess the actual locations to be explored in Dimension 4 or 5 if they are different from those in Dimensions 2 and then 1. Thematically, we can still discuss what would have happened with those themes of imprisonment and storytelling. But to do this, I will continue to refer to Dimensions 4 and 5 as if they take place in worlds similar to 2 and 1 respectively, just for the sake of explaining the story with symbols and examples we are well aware of. So, with that in mind, what would happen in Dimension 4? In terms of imprisonment, the biggest pattern so far has been the cycling of amnesia among the characters. Season 2 saw Homer having amnesia, while Hap and Prairie maintained their memories. Season 3 was going to show Prairie having amnesia, with Hap and Homer having their memories. And in Dimension 4, I think we would have seen Hap having amnesia, with Homer and Prairie retaining their memories. After they realize what has happened, OA and Homer would have to decide whether or not they should kill Hap while his memories are repressed, or or simply leave him behind. If Hap were to ever get his memories back, he'd be able to teach the 5 movements to others and will himself to whatever dimension Homer and Prairie are in, and plan a sneak attack on them wherever they are. While I don't really think Prairie would wrestle with killing Hap if he had his full consciousness, I think she would hesitate to kill him if he was lost in the memories of a legitimately good version of Hap, as killing that person would feel wrong, and the season may be about testing Hap to see how much of him is really lost in there. Back in Season 1, when Prairie tells the story of her father to the Crestwood Five, she explains that she was having nightmares of drowning in cold water. To make her not fear the dreams, her father made her stand in ice water, insisting that the only way to beat the cold is to become colder than it. This would play out thematically in Season 4, when OA has the chance to kill Hap, but it would mean killing an innocent version of him that hadn't done nearly as much evil the way Hap had with his kidnappings and murders back in Dimension 1. In a way, they would even feel imprisoned by Hap's lack of memories, feeling trapped by him because they can't trust that he'll remain unaware of who he really is, and they could never just leave him behind. This season will continue with the integration of the Shadow Selves by perhaps also showcasing a dimension where Homer and Prairie are their worst selves, and they have trouble accepting that they do certain horrible things they're known for in this dimension. This would lend credibility to the idea that the Hap of this dimension is good, and that all these characters are just slowly integrating across all of their different selves to find balance in their good and bad, each just starting at a different place. This would explain why Elodie has such a forgiving mind for Hap, not because she understands that there are good versions of him in other dimensions, but because she has known them intimately in some dimensions as well. She seemed to seduce Hap to get close to him, as well as to have spiritual fuel ready for her robots to perform the movements, but the way she talked to him was so much more enthusiastically than she did the OA, despite the OA simply being a little stubborn about not wanting to need her kidnapper who killed her and brought her back multiple times, and Hap being the man who did those things. It suggests not only that Elodie has been to dimensions where Hap is a good man, a man she may even love, but that OA may be a bit of a bad person in those dimensions, a person that Elodie only begrudgingly respects because of their ultimate purpose in the multiverse. One that she knows will integrate into better versions of herself the same way Hap is doing in a different direction. As far as storytelling themes go, after tackling our modern relationship with storytelling through television, I believe Season 4 would take on more religious themes, but there isn't too much to speculate on for Season 4 in this regard. If we do not return to San Francisco, I could see it taking place around a church or a chapel instead of a house, talking about the history of prophets and religion, and how all of their stories share similar themes shared even with the OA, which is something I believe would culminate beautifully in the final season in Dimension 5. While Dimension 5 could take place literally anywhere, thematically I believe it will of course return to Dimension 1. This could mean Prairie at the bunker, or Prairie in Crestwood, and ultimately I think both could happen, but for the sake of exploring the themes of imprisonment and storytelling, I will assume that Season 5 takes place almost entirely in the bunker, with Prairie and the others jumping from Dimension 4 into a new version of Dimension 1, a dimension where they are all captives to Hap, but where they never started learning the movement or seeing for themselves what was on the other side. While they could all return with their memories intact, they could also jump in with no memories at all except for OA, and she would be seen as just a crazy captive telling nonsense stories to the others, with not even Hap believing her. This would be the worst imprisonment of all, one where Prairie is physically imprisoned, and one where she's the only one aware of her true self, all that they have been through and what they really are. Her only hope would be to begin teaching them again from the very beginning, but in this dimension, I don't imagine it will go so well. In fact, I don't think any of the others will truly believe her. One by one, the other captives would be slowly killed off until only Prairie remained, and finally, Hap would have what he really wanted, even if he couldn't remember its value, which is Prairie, alone with him, with all the answers to the multiverse. Perhaps no new captives would ever come in because of just how disappointing Hap's work is when he doesn't doesn't have Prairie successfully trying to escape, giving him the insights he's trying to find. This may sound tragic, but that is what the theme of imprisonment is ultimately about. When Oe first died in Season 1, she was offered the chance to find everlasting peace with her father in the afterlife, or she could return to the bunker and find out who she really was. And what she ultimately is, according to Zal Batmanglij himself, is a prophet of sorts. The same way that Brit Marling and all amazing creative geniuses are prophets. The same kinds of minds that fought for control over the world through their religious texts, meant to help bring people to live better lives. The way the OA presents life, even our own flesh, is just a prison that keeps us separated from those we've come to love, and you either find yourself imprisoned by a madman, or lost in the memories that you don't remember what you really are, a higher being trapped in the flesh to play a role in the cosmic balance between science and spirit, between men and women, between the architects and the mediums that they exploit when they decide that their strength means that they are meant to lead with violence. To die would have meant to return to the essence and find peace, and no one would have blamed her, but she chose to return to be the only hope for 5 people in a bunker, telling them an amazing story about how if they can just wait long enough and learn to work in harmony, they can find a better place. But the truth is that there is no better place, or rather that there isn't one in any physical realm. To go to a world without Hap is just to find a world without each other, as they are all they know anymore. They would just end up forgetting who they are or shattering themselves across the multiverse so they can learn how important it is to find and take care of each other again and again. The OA ends its storytelling about storytelling by revealing that the OA is just the original author, whether that's Brit or Prairie or any version of her in the multiverse. From Dimension 3, Hap's Bunker looked like a fantasy story of Brit Marling for a TV series. But in the bunker, Dimension 3 will seem just like a crazy story that Prairie is telling to the other Haptives. In that way, Dimension 3 is just as much the imaginative idea of Prairie as Dimension 1 or 5 is for the imaginative mind of Brit Marling. All of these are dimensions of people imagining each other, perhaps creating each other, thinning the walls between their universes using each other. But despite the truth of those ideas, the Haptives will not believe her. They may find peace with it the way we see them do at the start of the journey back in Season 1, wanting to simply believe that they were angels, that they mattered in the scheme of things, and that this bunker was just proof of that. If they choose to believe her, they still don't escape, but just travel the multiverse and learn about how they are just going to be locked in different prisons in each dimension, and the only way for them to find any happiness is just to accept their prisons and try to love each other. They'll pretend to believe Prairie to appease her, but never get the movements to work, and die still believing that she was the most beautiful person that they ever met for trying to get them to believe. Finally, the OA, alone with Hap, integrated across the 5 dimensions, would have no reason to stay in Hap's bunker any longer. With them all dead, she no longer had any reason to remain Hap's prisoner, and she herself can go on as well, but how would she escape? In Dimension 2, Elodie describes the 5 movements as being just one of many tools used to travel across the multiverse, the same way that one might use a boat, car, train, or plane to travel up the coast, indicating that the movements are simply tools, ceremonial inventions. The 5 movements could have manifested as just about anything, and would have worked just as well if everything else in the story remained the same, making the movement similar to baptism or other religious rituals that are meant to provide some sort of spiritual power, like a Native American rain dance working only because the people were programmed to believe it would work, harnessing their mass energy to do something it could not do when unfocused. According to Elodie, what really matters is fuel, which can come in different forms, and Elodie is able to travel with just 5 tiny robots and a little sexual energy from Hap. At this point, OA would have integrated with her 5 selves across 5 dimensions, which has great importance. Back in Season 1, Katoon claimed to OA that she would avert a great evil with the help of the 5 of them. At the time, Prairie believes her to be talking about the Haptives, but is confused as there is only 4 of them. Later, Renata joins them, and many fans thought Khatoon meant that it was the five of them who would avert a great evil. And others have speculated that the five refers to the tribe that will form for Prairie, prophesied by the trees in Dimension 2, and it is likely meant to be all of these things and more. But, most of all, I think it's meant to be the 5 different versions of OA, integrating across the 5 dimensions. Together with all 5, and no one to stay behind for, she would perform the movements entirely alone, with Hap not believing anything will happen, with it not having worked any other time before. But this time it would, not just because she believed, but because she no longer needed to be Hap's prisoner. She would leave her body behind, not going to some alternate timeline to be free, but to return to the void where she could be with the others, the ones she had been sent to take care of, to be a prophet to these few captives in Hap's bunker, that reminded them of how important they are in the cosmic balance. By taking care of the Haptives and finally leaving Hap behind, the 5 versions of OA will have averted the great evil of Hap, the science conquering over the spirit, the woman in every dimension. It wouldn't matter if she didn't have 5 people performing the movements, she would have her 5 selves doing it. While we may not all integrate across a multiverse in the dramatic fashion that the characters of the OA do, the point is more so that this is why all these realities exist, even ones we make up. They exist in order for us to have these infinite experiences and to see different versions of ourselves, all with their own branching timelines of possibility, just like in reality. When we die, we all just come back together, and all those different experiences we thought we were missing out on in this one life we lived suddenly are there, and all the other lives we experienced as we join back together with them on the other side. But at the end of the day, this is just my speculation based off of the few puzzle pieces we were given from the show. I may have gotten it all wrong, but I like to think I at least aimed in the right direction. And if we never really get to find out how the OA would have ended, I hope you all at least enjoyed hearing these possibilities. Please let me know other shows you think I should dissect like this, and perhaps we can start building a platform that focuses on sharing and promoting more spiritually infused entertainment so that they won't get canceled prematurely in the future.